Over the past 10 or 15 years, we've had an incredible amount of change around us. September 11th attacks, the financial meltdown. We've lost our sense of job security, financial security, and if you throw in global warming, the rise of China, it's become a very uncertain world. And at the same time, on the other hand, you've had this incredible amount of disruptive innovation, Schumpeterian innovation with, in 2004, for example, the IPO of Google, the creation of Facebook, 2005, the creation of YouTube, today the world's largest media company. And you see in the space of a few years that we've had this incredible wave of disruptive innovation with the entrepreneur as sort of the hero and the driving force. It's not so much the Adam Smith invisible hand of the market, it's these waves of disruptive innovation. And in fact, probably the company that most perfectly symbolizes that is not YouTube and it's not Facebook, it's these guys. So if you pay attention for a second, this is an Amazon fulfillment warehouse. And no two packets look alike. They're all different. Well, this is an example of chaos at work and chaos being harnessed to run a fulfillment warehouse. They use chaotic math to determine where the packages go, so that the path of both the robots and the individuals who create the packages are minimized across the warehouse. But Amazon is not so significant because of its e-commerce prowess. It's really significant because it ushered in what one might call the age of markets. And so Amazon started running marketplaces around everything that it does, including its internal resources. And one of the areas in which it did that is compute resources. And so they would dynamically price and allocate resources internally. And then they found out they could actually open this up to the world and let the rest of the ecosystem benefit. And this was Amazon Web Services in 2006, which in my mind is sort of the totemic moment, the foundational moment of the world we live in, which is what you might call the age of markets or the age of platforms. And it's what Carlota Perez called the sixth industrial revolution. And these disruptions of markets are coming to every segment of industry. So I work in venture capital, a very cozy place to work because it's raise a fund every 4 years, kind of make some investments, go back again. Well, disruption's coming to us. A company called AngelList started out as a nice little marketplace where startups could get in touch with capital. They could get in touch with talent, with advisors. But about 3 months ago, AngelList started becoming really disruptive. They launched a product called Syndicates. And Syndicates allows you, as an accredited investor, to follow any angel out there and to follow their money into startup companies. Now think for a second as to what that means. So I blew up the profile of Tim Ferriss here, who's very famous for writing annoying books like The 4-Hour Workweek. But he's also a pretty good angel investor. Look at his portfolio: Facebook, StumbleUpon, Twitter. But he only invests about $25,000 per company, which is a very low amount. So what he's done is he's gone on AngelList, and he managed to aggregate 349 followers, which means he can now come into a startup with $1.6 million every time he makes an investment decision. So suddenly, an individual who's writing books has become a competitor of mine in the seed venture market. And all it takes is for you to click the little back button, because all the documents are standardized, they're fully online, it's a true marketplace. And these disruptions are coming everywhere. If you don't think your industry is getting disrupted, it's just a question of time. So I'm a VC, I'm also a blogger, and on my blog you'll find a pretty collection of rotating fractals. So this is one of them, this is a mathematical fractal. And the reason why I use fractals on my blog is because I think I'm fundamentally unable to predict the future. Which is kind of funny if you think about it, because I'm supposed to be an investor and I have to choose winners. Well, I posit ignorance as my starting point. I don't know who's going to be successful. I can kind of tell you what the conditions for success might be, but I fundamentally cannot predict anything. And so for us as human beings, we strive for comfort and security and predictability, but we actually live more and more in a world of complete chaos where large corporations die incredibly fast as they're disrupted by new startups where pretty much nothing is predictable. And so for us as humans, there's a whole new category of stresses that has come to us because of this chaos. And how we can manage to be successful and happy in this world is really a challenge. So one way to think about this, which I like, is the notion of allostatic load. Allostatic load is like a measure of the wear and tear on the body created by repeated stresses. So when humans were created, we were designed to deal with situations such as, coming across a tiger and having to run away really fast to survive. And so our allostatic responses are designed for these extreme peaks where we had to get ourselves out of dangerous situations. But we were never designed to deal with chronic situations of stress with this incredible level of uncertainty and chaos around us. And it's sort of slowly killing us. Allostatic load is what kills most of us at the end of the day. And so as human beings, we have to think about how we embrace chaos instead of fighting it so we can adapt to these new stressors and be both happy and productive. So the first thing to think about when people are faced with chaos, they tend to rely on things like luck. Well, there's a guy called Richard Wiseman who has spent his entire career trying to think about what luck really meant. And here's a study that he did. He had about 400 subjects that he followed for 10 years. And one of the experiments he ran was to give them a newspaper and say, count the number of photographs in this newspaper. And his cohort, his 400 people, were people who declared themselves extremely lucky or people who declared themselves extremely unlucky. And it turned out that the people who declared themselves lucky would usually complete the task in about 7 to 10 seconds. And the people who thought themselves unlucky will take a couple of minutes. Why, you ask? Well, on page 2, we had a huge insert that said, stop counting, there are 43 pictures in this newspaper. But the unlucky people would never catch it. And then on page 7, he had, stop counting and get $250 right now if you tell the examiner you've seen this insert. And the unlucky people will never catch it. And so based on that and all his research, he found that unlucky people were narrowly focused on the outcome and the specific task at hand and the rules that they perceived were associated with the task, whereas lucky people were more open to chance. They were just available. They had no fixed routines. They were sort of more malleable to what life would throw at them. So the moral of that story is everybody's lucky someday. You just have to be ready to do something with it when luck knocks at your door. Now, if you think of chaos and you see luck knocking at your door, how do you perform? And how do you perform in a good way in situations of chaos is the next question. Now, there's a guy called Csikszentmihalyi. I'm not going to ask you to repeat his name. And Csikszentmihalyi studied what he called the theory of flow. And flow is basically when you have a merging of awareness and action and you forget about yourself and you're sort of in the zone. It's what great athletes tend to perform under. So Csikszentmihalyi spent his whole career trying to understand flow, and he came up with a few things that need to be present for people to achieve flow. Clear, ambitious, but attainable goals. In other words, I want to be stretched on something that's attainable. A sense of personal control in my actions. Direct and immediate feedback from my actions. And an activity that's inherently rewarding. Well, the world I live in, the world of startups, is actually a perfect place to go and achieve that, because we're constantly showing our product to the market, and every single iteration gets exposed to clients immediately. And we have individual contributors who have a sense of personal control of what they do on a real-time basis. And actually, if you think about it, startups are these underfunded, under-resourced companies that continuously go and kick the ass of these large mega corporations with hundreds of people and almost endless budgets. Well, it's because you can think of them as entire teams that are in a state of flow and that outperform just because they're so much more efficient in what they do. The next thing I'd like to think about is compensation. So again, we are in a world where we think status and money are indicators of success. And you should go and read Dan Pink, who has popularized a lot of research around this. Effectively, what the research has shown is that there is an inverse correlation between how much money I'm paying you and your performance for knowledge-based tasks, which is completely counterintuitive, but is repeated time and time again. The more I pay you, the less well you will perform for knowledge-based tasks. I'm not saying you shouldn't be paid. I'm saying you should probably just be paid enough that money is off the table, but it's not really what motivates people. What motivates people to do well and be happy is autonomy, the sense, again, that the sense of personal control around what you do, mastery, the perfection of a craft that you care about, and finally, a sense of purpose, the why in why you do things. Lastly, talk about Maslow and hierarchy of needs. So Maslow looked at high-performing individuals, Albert Einstein, people like that, and he was trying to understand how do they get to these higher levels of performance. And so he defined a set of categories of needs that people have, comfort, food, safety, a sense of belonging. But what he found was that the people who really outperformed went beyond esteem. They went beyond career and recognition and awards. They went to another place, which he called self-actualization. So in other words, the ability to truly be me. And when you look at your career again, you might have money, you might have status, but at the end of the day you retire, all that goes away. Well, the sense of self-actualization never goes away. And entrepreneurs are, in a way, the ultimate example of saying, I am me. The single individual who leaves an established job and goes out there on their own and says, you have to fund me because I believe I'm going to change the world by doing X. And there's something quite fundamental in my mind about the act of company creation. Now, there's nothing inherently good about technology. It can be used for bad things. But there's something inherently human about the desire to create a company. And personally, it's why I'm so fascinated by working with entrepreneurs. Now, what transcends all of that is purpose. Startups are incredibly hard. The fear will move from your belly to your chest when you're not getting funded, when you're running out of money, and the company's failing. And when the times are dark like that, and again, you're faced with chaos and you're not sure you're going to survive, what helps entrepreneurs transcend the situation that they're in is a clear sense of purpose. These guys understand the why of why they're doing things, and it's this guiding light that helps them get through really tough times. And I've come to believe that a sense of purpose is actually probably the most important thing for us to thrive in chaos. So we live in a world of complete unpredictability where large corporations die quickly, where startups fail, where we just cannot adapt to the environment around us fast enough. And I think the only thing we can do is to let this chaos sort of wash over us and understand how we achieve things like flow, things like self-actualization, so we can both manage the stress in a good way and actually achieve both performance and happiness. And startups are like little labs in which these things get done in quite an incredible way. I'd like to part with a few thoughts about what it means to be a parent since we're in a school. I think fundamentally we're not trying to teach our kids skills at this stage. I think we're trying to determine how we're going to create little individuals who can deal with chaos. And so we need grit and character and the ability to fail and get back on their feet. And we also need to understand who they are as individuals. Because I fundamentally believe that everybody is absolutely great at something, but instead of trying to put them on rails that try and determine what the success of their career might be, we have to help them find the me in them, the self-actualized person in our little children, and then let them blossom, whatever that may be. Thank you very much.